He shattered her heart with a champagne toast, replaced her with a younger woman, and thought she'd fade quietly into the background. But what he didn't expect was for both women to rise, not to fight for him, but to build a world without him. The night was perfect. At least, that's what Leah Carrington told herself as the valet opened the car door, and she stepped out onto the marble entrance of Maison du Soleil, one of Manhattan's most exclusive rooftop restaurants. She wore a navy blue silk gown, one Daniel had gifted her just 2 weeks ago. "It matches your eyes," he'd said, brushing her cheek absently before disappearing into a conference call. Tonight, she thought, might be the night they reconnect. After all, they hadn't had a proper dinner together in weeks, maybe even months. As they were escorted to a private terrace table under golden lanterns and white roses, Leah couldn't help but smile. She looked at her husband, Daniel, tall, composed, magnetic in that infuriating way that made people forgive his arrogance. He was distracted, checking his watch, glancing toward the elevator. But that wasn't unusual. He lived 10 seconds ahead of every moment. What was unusual, however, was that there were 3 place settings at their table. She frowned. "Are we expecting someone else?" Daniel didn't look up. "Just a little surprise," he said, sipping his scotch. "You'll see." The server poured champagne into their glasses. Leah noticed Daniel wasn't wearing his wedding ring. Again, she pushed the thought aside. Moments later, the elevator doors opened. Out walked Aria Voss, Daniel's executive assistant, barely 25, breathtakingly beautiful in a designer black dress that clung like a second skin. Leah's smile faltered. "Aria," she said, confused, looking between them. Aria smiled politely. "Hi, Mrs. Carrington." Daniel stood. "No need for formalities anymore, Aria. Come, sit." Leah's pulse began to race, her skin prickling cold despite the warm night air. "Daniel, what is this?" He cleared his throat, then clinked his spoon against his glass. The sound rang sharp into the night, pulling attention from nearby tables. A few guests turned their heads, sensing something was about to unfold. "Ladies and gentlemen," Daniel announced, raising his glass with a grin, "I'm thrilled to share some personal news tonight. Aria and I." He paused, placing a hand on Aria's, fingers intertwining casually, intimately. "Are engaged." The words seemed to hang in the air like smoke. There was a moment of stunned silence, followed by the faint gasp of a socialite at the next table. Leah blinked once, then twice, as if her brain refused to register the blow. She laughed nervously. "I don't understand. Is this a joke?" Daniel didn't sit. "Leah, you and I, we've been drifting for years. You know that. We've both been pretending. This just makes it official. It's time we stop living a lie." Leah's throat tightened. Her heart pounded in her ears. "In front of everyone? You brought me here to announce your engagement to someone else? Like this?" "I thought it'd be better than doing it behind closed doors," Daniel replied, tone indifferent. "You deserve honesty." Her voice cracked. "This isn't honesty. This is cruelty." Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the lights around her. She saw waiters awkwardly retreating, guests whispering, phones discreetly raised to capture the moment. Aria shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we should've." "No," Daniel said, cutting her off gently but firmly. "It's done. It's time Leah starts a new chapter too." Leah stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the stone floor. Her legs trembled beneath her. "You humiliated me," she whispered. "Not just as a wife. As a woman." She looked at Aria, whose eyes darted away in shame or guilt. It didn't matter. Leah's hands clenched into fists at her sides. The champagne flute on the table trembled slightly, a small ripple forming inside. Without another word, she turned and walked away. The cameras caught every step. As the elevator doors closed behind her, a single tear slid down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. She let the world see it. And in that moment, even though she didn't know it yet, something inside her began to rise. The morning after the engagement announcement, Arya Voss woke up in a bed of Egyptian cotton, wrapped in sheets that smelled of lavender and Daniel's expensive cologne. The Manhattan skyline stretched endlessly outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of Daniel Carrington's penthouse. To the world, she had won. The billionaire, the lifestyle, the ring, all hers. But as she rolled over, she found herself alone. Again. The sheets were cold beside her. She sat up slowly, her heart oddly still. A soft ache bloomed behind her ribs. There was no note on the nightstand. No rose. No good morning, fiancé text. Just silence, and a half-empty glass of scotch on the tray near the fireplace, left from whatever late-night call Daniel had taken before disappearing into his home office. Arya slid out of bed and walked barefoot across the marble floor. Her reflection in the penthouse mirror startled her. She looked stunning and miserable, eyes lined with smudged eyeliner from the night before, lips still coated in the bold red Daniel liked. She had looked perfect at dinner, but that perfection had come at a cost she hadn't begun to understand. By noon, the tabloids had exploded. Carrington dumps wife for assistant in public spectacle. Power move or midlife crisis? Billionaire's engagement to 25-year-old sparks backlash. Leah Carrington spotted leaving in tears. Arya scrolled endlessly, heart pounding with every headline. In every image, she looked like the villain, the homewrecker, the trophy, and maybe she was. She stared at her engagement ring, flawless, glimmering under the sun, and felt a strange weight pressing down on her finger. Not pride, not love, guilt. Later that evening, Daniel emerged from his office, phone in hand, sleeves rolled up, his usual whirlwind of power and presence. "Dinner's in 20, he said, barely glancing at her. "I told Chef Marco you're vegan now. That's still a thing, right?" Arya stood in the middle of the room, barefoot, wearing one of his crisp, white dress shirts. "Did you even think about how it would make her feel? Leah?" He stopped. His jaw tightened. "I'm not talking about Leah anymore," he said. "That chapter is closed." "She looked broken," Arya whispered. Daniel walked to the bar, poured himself a neat bourbon. "She'll be fine. She's stronger than she looks. Besides, you're the one who should be celebrating. You're the future, not her." Something about that made Arya recoil. She remembered how, just 6 months ago, she'd looked up to Leah, admired her grace, her style, how she handled rooms full of powerful men without shrinking. Arya had once wanted to be her, and now she'd taken her place. Except it didn't feel like a promotion. It felt like trespassing. The days that followed were glittering and hollow. Designer fittings, interviews with Vogue and Vanity Fair. The new face of modern luxury, they called her. Daniel beamed for the cameras, his hand always on her waist, lips always pressed to her temple. But behind closed doors, he was cold, sharp, and calculating. He didn't ask what books she liked. He didn't listen when she spoke about her dreams of opening a wellness studio. He corrected her when she laughed too loud in public. When she posted an unedited photo to Instagram, he made her take it down. "You represent me now," he said one night, eyes narrowed. Every post is a brand statement. Slowly, Arya realized that she wasn't being loved. She was being displayed. A trophy. A status symbol. A shiny object in a glass case. Her friends stopped calling. Her inbox filled with hate. She began to avoid looking at herself in mirrors. One night, while Daniel was out of town, Arya wandered into the study and pulled a leather-bound journal from one of the bookshelves, one of Leah's old journals, forgotten or left behind. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside, she found Leah's words, raw, brilliant, painfully human. There were pages about Daniel's cruelty, his obsession with control, his emotional absence. But there were also entries about healing, hope, and self-worth. It was a window into the heart of a woman Arya had tried to replace. She read for hours. By dawn, tears streamed silently down her face. It was the first time she cried, not out of guilt, but grief. Not for what she'd done, but for what she had become. Arya closed the journal, held it to her chest, and whispered to the empty room. I don't want to be her replacement. I want to be me. But in Daniel's world, being you came at a cost. And she was only beginning to understand how high that price would be. The air in Maine was different. Leah noticed at the moment she stepped out of the black SUV. The scent of pine and salt water brushing past her like a memory long forgotten. The driver unloaded her bags without a word. She didn't tip him. Not out of rudeness. She had simply forgotten what normal social rules felt like after weeks of silence, headlines, and heartbreak. The cottage was modest, at least by Carrington standards. Weathered white shingles, a slanted porch swing, and a front door that creaked like something from an old love song. She had bought it on a whim a year ago during a solo weekend escape. Back then, it was just a fantasy, a place she imagined retiring to, painting in the mornings, sipping coffee in quiet peace. Now it was a sanctuary, a hideout, a place to bleed. The first few days were brutal. She didn't unpack right away. The suitcases sat untouched by the fireplace, while Leah rotated between the couch, the floor, and her unmade bed. She stopped checking her phone. The news cycle had moved on, but the comments never stopped. Everyone had an opinion. Some pitied her, others blamed her. Many said she should have seen it coming. She screamed into pillows, cried until her throat was raw. She smashed a wine glass just to hear something break that wasn't her. Some days, she didn't speak at all. Others, she talked out loud to herself just to remember the sound of her own voice. It was during one of those silent mornings, wrapped in a threadbare cardigan and clutching a chipped coffee mug, that she opened her laptop, not to scroll, not to read headlines, but to write. She didn't plan it. The words just came. This morning I remembered how my mother used to make tea when I was heartbroken. She'd tell me, "We are all made of fire and ash. You just have to decide which part of you survives." She paused. Then she kept writing. She poured her shame, her fury, her loss onto the page. But also her resilience, still buried, still aching, but alive. She didn't know what it would become, but she knew it mattered. She hit publish on a blog post she titled, Ashes and Alchemy. It got 12 views, then 30, then 300, then 3,000. The blog became her ritual. Mornings began with tea, walks along the rocky coastline, then writing. Sometimes raw essays, sometimes poems, sometimes letters she'd never send, to Daniel, to Arya, to the version of herself that had died on that rooftop terrace. She began painting again, abstract pieces that looked like emotions spilled across canvas. The first one she titled Impact. It was red and black and violet and jagged as hell. She hated it, but she kept it. A local cafe owner saw her blog, invited her to speak at a women's circle. She said no. Then she said yes. That night, standing in front of 18 women, farmers, teachers, divorced mothers, widows, she read one of her pieces. Her voice trembled, cracked, then steadied. When she finished, no one clapped. They stood. And they cried. Leah wasn't Leah Carrington anymore. That woman lived in a glass penthouse above a silent city, always waiting, always pretending. Here, she wore jeans and no makeup. She walked barefoot across hardwood floors. She burned sage without knowing if it worked.
She didn't need it to.
She found joy in small things, the way the wind sounded through the trees, the satisfaction of chopping vegetables for herself, the softness of clean sheets hung in the sun. She was becoming someone new, not polished, not perfect, but whole. One rainy evening, as she watched the storm roll in from the porch, her phone buzzed. An email from a publishing agent. Subject: Ashes and Alchemy. We need to talk. Leah blinked. Then she smiled, not because she had made it, but because for the first time in a long time, she had made herself. The ballroom of the Langston Grand Hotel glittered with chandeliers and ambition. The Women of Influence Summit was in full swing, and the crowd buzzed with the hum of high heels, laughter, and legacy. Corporate titans, entrepreneurs, best-selling authors, and rising stars in sleek suits and sharp eyeliner gathered beneath gold archways and velvet drapes. This wasn't just a conference. It was a coronation ground for the modern woman. And Arya Voss felt like an imposter. She stood near the back of the room, fingers wrapped tightly around a glass of cucumber water she hadn't touched. Her hair was pulled into a polished bun. Her outfit, beige power suit, black stilettos, was flawless. Her face was camera-ready, but inside, her stomach twisted with unease. She hadn't been invited as a speaker. She wasn't on any panel. She had come alone, unannounced, sitting in the audience like everyone else. Because she needed to see her. Leah Carrington. The name glowed on the screen above the stage like a prophecy. Keynote speaker, Leah Carrington, founder of Ashes and Alchemy. The applause was thunderous when she walked out. No music, no entourage, no drama. Just Leah, dressed in a slate gray jumpsuit, minimal makeup, her curls wild around her face. She didn't glide. She owned the stage with the stillness of someone who no longer needed to prove she belonged there. Arya stared. It had been over a year, and Leah had never looked more alive. Leah stood at the podium, gripping a small remote. Her first slide appeared behind her, a photograph of broken ceramic pieces arranged into a mosaic, gold filling the cracks.
Kintsugi, she began.
The Japanese art of mending broken pottery with gold. They don't try to hide the cracks. They highlight them, because the break becomes part of the beauty. The room held its breath. When I was publicly humiliated by the man I loved, I thought I had been shattered. And for a while I was. But pain has a strange way of offering clarity. It shows you who you are when no one is looking, who you are when no one is clapping. A ripple of nods, a murmur of agreement. Leah paced slowly. They thought I would disappear. Instead, I discovered myself. Not in revenge, not in trying to win, but in healing. Arya's throat tightened. Her eyes stung. She remembered those nights in the penthouse, sitting in silence, Daniel lecturing her on brand optics, the way he would smirk when she cried, how he flinched every time she mentioned her dreams. And she remembered finding Leah's journal. That was the beginning of her own quiet undoing. When the talk ended, Leah received a standing ovation. But she didn't smile for the applause. She stepped back humbly, gave a small bow, and disappeared behind the curtain. Arya sat, frozen, until the crowd began to scatter. Then she stood and followed. Backstage was a blur of assistants, makeup artists, producers, and journalists. Arya found her in the dressing room, quiet, candlelit, and calm. Leah was sitting at the mirror, dabbing tea onto her under eyes, humming softly to herself. She noticed Arya in the reflection. "I wondered if you'd come," she said simply. Arya swallowed. You knew. I saw you during the Q&A, Leah said, turning. Your posture's still ballerina straight, but your eyes give you away. They looked at each other. There was no tension, just a strange, heavy silence between two women who had survived the same man in different ways. I owe you an apology, Arya said quietly. No, Leah replied. You owe one to yourself. Arya blinked, confused. You believed the lie, Leah continued. That he was the prize. That his attention meant you were enough. I believed it too, for years. But the real betrayal wasn't against me. It was what you gave up of yourself to stand beside him. Arya felt the words land like stones in her chest. She stepped closer. I didn't know who I was back then, she admitted. I thought if he chose me, it meant I was valuable.
But he didn't choose me. He consumed me.
And I let him. Leah smiled, soft and sad. Same story, different chapters. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Leah opened a small box on the table and pulled out a delicate gold chain. Here, she said, handing it to Arya. It's yours. Arya hesitated. What is it? It's the pendant I wore the night of the dinner, Leah said. You know the one. Arya's hands trembled as she took it. Why give this to me? Because I don't need reminders anymore, Leah said. But maybe you need a symbol. Not of what happened, but of what you survived. Arya nodded slowly, tears welling in her eyes. I'm starting over, she whispered. Launching something. A wellness brand. Real wellness. Not the fake, curated kind. For women like us. Leah smiled, this time for real. Good, she said. The world doesn't need more perfect women. It needs more honest ones. As Arya stepped out of the dressing room and back into the noisy world of ambition and applause, she felt the weight of the gold chain around her neck. Not as a punishment, but as a promise. Daniel Carrington stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan penthouse, alone, and watched the city lights flicker like dying stars. The skyline had never felt so empty. Behind him, the once immaculate apartment was in quiet disarray. Dust lined the corners of the shelves. Half-packed boxes sat against the wall. A shattered tumbler lay in the kitchen sink. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. The only sound was the buzz of his phone vibrating across the marble counter. Another notification. Carrington Technologies drops 22% as SEC opens investigation. Former employees accuse CEO of misconduct, toxic culture. Leah Carrington's memoir tops bestseller list for 9th week. Daniel locked the phone and tossed it face down. The world was collapsing, and this time, he couldn't spin the narrative. It hadn't happened all at once. No, the fall of Daniel Carrington had been slow and almost poetic, an unraveling he never saw coming because he believed, deeply, that he was untouchable. It started when the board of directors began raising concerns. Too many headlines. Too many photos of him at fashion events with women half his age. Too much press around Leah's book, and how eerily some of her personal essays aligned with what former staff were now alleging. And then came the leaks. Internal emails. Audio recordings. Whispers of NDA-covered meltdowns. The exodus of key talent from his executive team. Investors pulled back. Partnerships froze. Employees began organizing. And the tech media, once full of awe, turned on him like wolves sensing blood. He was no longer the visionary. He was the cautionary tale. His phone buzzed again. A text this time, from Arya. For what it's worth, I hope you find whatever part of yourself is still worth saving. He stared at the screen, his jaw tightening.
He didn't respond.
He had nothing to say. Because somewhere deep inside, he knew she was right. Daniel poured himself a drink. Neat, no ice, just like always. He sat in the leather armchair by the fire, surrounded by silence, and let the weight of his empire press down on him. He had thought this world was his kingdom, that the women who loved him were disposable. That control was the same thing as love.
But now?
Leah Carrington had become a global symbol of rebirth. Her memoir, Ashes and Alchemy, was being adapted into a miniseries. She had launched a foundation for women rebuilding after betrayal, trauma, or abuse, and the world embraced her. Arya Voss, the assistant he once molded, had built a wildly successful wellness brand in less than a year. She gave talks now, interviews, had just inked a book deal of her own, not about him, but about freedom. She didn't mention Daniel. She didn't need to. The real punishment wasn't jail time, or lawsuits, or even losing his company. The real punishment was irrelevance. And Daniel Carrington was becoming invisible. In a moment of quiet desperation, he opened Leah's book, the copy someone had sent him without a return address. He turned to a dog-eared chapter. To the men who broke us, thank you. You gave us ashes. We made art. He slammed the book shut. His hand trembled. The drink spilled across the table, dark and smooth like oil. Outside, the city moved on without him. And somewhere, far from the towers and stock prices, two women, once broken by the same man, were building worlds of their own. Worlds he would never be invited into again. And in the end, the man who had everything was left with only himself. We have come to the end of the story. Do not forget to subscribe, like, and share for more captivating stories from Tales Haven.